Morning.
I must say, I really enjoyed. I read it on the bus this morning, actually on the way in. Your piece from the Critic about industrial correspondence. It really did. I knew quite a few of the names in there, so it gave me an extra sort of glow. But it was quite a remarkable recollection of the way things used to be. Very funny.
Well, a lot of people have enjoyed it. I'm not quite sure why so much, but they perhaps it opens with a huge, bearded, unconscious man lying in the bottom of a telephone booth while the phone swings gently over his head and a voice comes out of it saying, "Hello, hello. Why have you stopped?" But this is that's how it begins.
Yes.
This is what it was like. The person involved, who actually I don't think would have at all minded if I named him, but I was a bit worried that he might have some relatives who'd be upset. But he just completely lost consciousness in the middle of dictating his story to his office. And then Paul Routledge, who was at that time Labour editor of the Times and is still very much with us, writing mainly the Daily Mirror.
I know Paul, yeah.
Came along and saw this figure lying slumped in an enormous heap, picked up the phone and said hello, tried slightly to imitate Bob's, whoever it was, accent, and there it was. He finished the story in the correct style, and it appeared in the paper.
That was the great skill as well, wasn't it?
That was typical of the Times. We looked after each other in the industrial correspondence, even though we fought like cats for the stories, and we competed like mad. We understood that we had to look after each other a bit, and it also generally we used to get telephoned in the middle of the night, probably 3 or 4 times a week, asked to follow up our rival stories. So some people would let others know what they were going to have in the paper, so they would really sort of follow it. But there was an absolute omerta. You weren't allowed to break those embargoes or do anything about it unless you were called. But it was very competitive, but also very supportive. And I have to say, it was also in many cases extremely drunk.
Yes, but I mean, again, that was sort of the order of the day, wasn't it? I mean, there was definitely honour among thieves. When I was in shortly before I got to America, actually, the Grenada thing happened, where the American military invaded an island which was seemingly occupied by a bunch of students, and it wasn't exactly as I think the man in the movie A Few Good Men say. Many of them actually surrendered to a crew from CNN. They were so unsure of what to do. But there was a telegraph correspondent who was similarly imbued with a love of drink, and he completely missed everything, but was lying sort of comatose in his hotel room. And he awoke in the morning to find a piece of paper, a telegram had been shoved under his door, congratulating him on leading the paper, and it had come from the editor, and he didn't remember filing anything because he hadn't filed anything, but it had been done for him by one of his colleagues. And he was
very kind, and absolutely right too. But the drink was a problem in those days, and although one makes light of it a bit, it did destroy people.
Oh yeah.
Some people it very nearly destroyed, and it certainly seriously damaged their health. But it was a thing at the time, and anybody reading the newspapers at that time has to be aware of the fact that it was going on. And just as in some literary careers, a lot of authors have written drunk. There was a lot of it about, and it was worrying and perplexing sometimes to watch, as well as being funny. But it's a whole lost world. In fact, I think most people coming into journalism, or indeed coming out of university today, would be completely and utterly amazed if they realized that the world had ever been like that, smelled like that, looked like that, sounded like that. It's utterly gone. And one of the reasons why I welcome the suggestion that came from the editor of the Critics to write about this was that it is such a lost world, and when people like me die, there won't be any memory of it.
Yeah.
It will just completely have gone, because although there've been quite scholarly writings in the British Journalism Review by Paul Routledge and others about the industrial correspondence, they haven't tended to go into the madness of it.
No.
To the extent that article did.
No, quite. But the other thing that struck me as well was the colourful nature of some of the other figures in the game, as it were. You know, not the journalists, but some of the union leaders who were similarly imbued with sort of superhuman powers of drinking, big, and sort of carousing, and generally they were very, very interesting people, which we don't have many of in the world now either.
No, these are real men. Not many. Some of them were hard drinking, and some of them were not. The coal miners tended to be, as it goes with the trade. It's the same with sailors. There's an awful lot of drinking in dangerous jobs. But a lot of the others were stone cold sober. I don't know whether Jack Jones ever drank very much, for instance, but he was an immensely powerful person to meet.
Yes.
But Joe Gormley, the miners' leader, who I remember being introduced to, it's the first time I ever really saw power radiating from a human individual. It was just there. It filled the room.
Yeah.
And this was a person who had power, knew he had it, intended to use it, and it was an fascinating education. I always refer to my time in Fleet Street as a long, now nearly more than 40-year remedial course at the University of Fleet Street.
Yes.
After the failures of my conventional university education. And my goodness, you saw a lot of really important things of that kind. The true nature of power, face-to-face being one of them. But these were all guys as well, the trade union people, they'd all fought their way up to prominence and power by being brave and by being indomitable and by being tough. And you could not respect them, even if you disagreed with them completely.
No, quite. And also, I remember when I got into newspapers, it was probably the early 80s, and there were some really sort of genuinely good and interesting and very bad people as well. But you learned from all those people various different things. You know, the crime correspondents all knew the police. You know, the industrial correspondents, as you say, knew all the union leaders, you know. And now it seems to me that we've got this kind of university class of you know, the working from home brigade, who don't come with any sort of experience of life, really. You know, they haven't come through the trade system, which is what most journalists did when I started. It was a trade. It wasn't. You didn't go to university to have to become a journalist.
Well, I came out of university, but I then had to do this extraordinary thing. I had to sign articles as an indentured apprentice,
right?
To go and work for a newspaper. Although they made a big thing out of recruiting graduates, it was made plain from the start that what you had to learn from the beginning.
Yeah.
And at the end of every week, when being sneered at by the others for not knowing any law, how to write stories,
right,
or how to write a headline, all those other things, which was very educational. At the end of that, we were then put in a classroom with a primary school teacher who taught us shorthand.
Yeah.
It was right back to the beginning. And but the problem with the absolute takeover of the graduates in everything is that kind of thing is pushed to one side. But also the training grounds have gone. The old local newspapers, they're amazing. The Swindon Evening Advertiser, when I joined it in 1973, it had a full-time librarian.
Yes.
And a full-scale cuttings library, going an absolute memory.
He probably knew everything there was to know about the history of Wiltshire, right, off the top of his head.
Yeah, and a lot of the reporters had immensely long experience in the place. All that's dissipated now. You're very lucky if you find local newspapers, anything like that level of resources or experience. And so people who go to them are not going to have much time to learn. In any case, so all that's lost.
Yeah, and I think as a general sort of principle, our overall kind of watching of what goes on at local government level has gone, because the people who used to keep an eye on the council were the guys in the local papers, and now the council basically don't have to worry about that because they haven't got anybody to cover what they do.
It's certainly not as good as it was. I mean, there are obviously exceptions. There are places where they still try reasonably hard, but it's harder with the resources they have to do it. And the other thing, of course, is not being covered properly is the criminal justice system.
Yes.
Of course.
Right.
Which we used to do as we always had somebody there.
Right.
Who couldn't go unnoticed, and that's an important part of justice, is that it's done in public, and,
yes.
And that the free press is keeping an eye on it, and that has shriveled away in the past.
Yeah.
Again, there are people who still do it, but it's nothing like the scale that it used to be at.
No.
I think you could probably be arrested, tried, and convicted these days without anybody ever knowing.
Yes, I think that's true. And the sad state of the judicial system as well is not reported upon, because it really is failing massively. I talk to barristers who tell me every day that, you know, there's a huge backlog of cases. There's not enough lawyers. You know, the lawyers who do work on legal aid don't get paid enough. And you know, there's not enough open courts. There's loads of courts sitting empty at the moment.
No, it's a national scandal, and I think two people, the guy who posts as barrister blogger, and the other one who I don't like very much, but who's done good work on this, the secret barrister, have done what they can to reveal this. But I think one of the reasons why it's got as bad as it is because it simply isn't covered anymore as it used to be, and also relations between the police and the press have been quite seriously disrupted by many things over the last 20 years. And so the general coverage of criminal justice is much, much weaker.
Yes, I think so. Let's talk a bit about your particular controversy this weekend. You wrote a piece about Ridley Road, which is the BBC's new sort of drama on a Sunday night. And you got, rather surprisingly, taken to task for it.
Well, I didn't think I was taken to task for it. I think the criticisms that were levelled against it were just plain wrong. What I pointed out was that if you watch it, and you can watch it on the iPlayer, and one reviewer rather amusingly referred to it as "call the midwife with fascists," but it is
call the fascists.
Well, I call the fascists, but because it obviously it exploits the rather different glamour of the era, you know, the suspender belts and all the rest of it. It states on screen. I haven't got the direct quotation in front of me that Colin Jordan, the Timbot Nazi who is the central villain of it, was gaining public support at the time. Now, I just don't think this is true. And I went back, and this is one of the great things newspaper people could do. I went back down into the old Associated Newspapers cuttings library to look up Colin Jordan. That is a figure of fun. Right. The first episode features a demonstration, but it's not very clear. It doesn't actually the version of it in the TV drama doesn't actually misrepresent it, but it doesn't make it as clear, anything like as clear as the newspaper reports do. That when Colin Jordan and his fellow neo-Nazis turned up in Trafalgar Square and started saying Hitler was right, they were mobbed by at least 2,000 opponents who pelted them with pennies and tomatoes and drove them from the platform. Colin Jordan himself had to take refuge in the underground station. The police closed the entrance to the underground so he could run away. Right. He wasn't popular. Support wasn't rising. And there's another element in this, and actually a reviewer in a left-wing magazine, The New Statesman, picks up on this point as well. It's worth noticing that the people who are, as it were, the ordinary people who are portrayed as being sympathetic to Colin Jordan are made to say things like, we need to take back our country, to make them sound like, basically like Leave campaign supporters of today. Yes. I think that's completely unfair. Either to anybody who felt conservative in the early 60s when all their homes were being demolished and replaced with concrete flats and supermarkets were replacing their corner shops and whatever, that anybody like that was somehow a fascist dupe. I just think that's misleading. Yeah. I thought the attacks that came, said, what are you saying, that nobody attacked Jews? Well, no, of course, Colin Jordan was a revolting person, and his supporters did terrible things. But that doesn't mean that he was politically significant at the time.
No, and I suspect
he lived with his mother in a suburban house. His mother was called Bertha. He had a mad leather-clad wife who went around wearing a Nazi pendant. And whenever she tried to get a taxi in London, the taxi driver said, "I'm taking you, love." Right. And one of them actually pulled it off and was taken to court for it. He said, "Well, I don't care. I'm not chauffeuring Nazis around London." They were ludicrous people. They had a wedding ceremony when they cut their arms open and mingled their blood. These are lunatics. And they did not have. If you look up election results, opinion polls from the time, I do not think you will find there was anything remotely resembling a surge of support for these nutcases. And I think, sure, they were bad people, but the other thing about Colin Jordan is that he was locked up by the state. He wasn't ignored and left to do what he wanted to do. He set up a ludicrous private army, and he was caught at it and was put in jail where they made him make television aerials.
Yes, and I suppose what you're suggesting, or you suspect is going on here, is that the BBC are taking this and using it as an opportunity to draw comparisons which are simply not there.
Well, that's what it looks like to me. And I say, look at the New Statesman television review, and I think these are people with very different political opinions from me, and a wholly different area of them. But I think they sense something similar in it, and I just think it's just an abuse of drama. I mean, doubtless, some people think Ridley Road is a good book. I haven't read it. I couldn't say, but there's no reason not to make dramas about these things. But the problem with dramas about the past is that people get the impression that they're true, and that huge damage has been done by the Netflix series The Crown.
Yes,
telling lots and lots of things which are straightforwardly untrue about the royal family and British high politics. But because they've been on television, millions of people believe that's what happened.
Yes. I love the fact as well that it's a sort of footnote, isn't it? Sometimes, and sometimes it's not even there when they say something like, you know, some of the events portrayed in this drama didn't happen. Sort of, you know, as if that's okay. It's not okay.
Well, the giveaway is based on actual events. Which is like some hideous product which is made with real lemons.
Yes,
I've dropped a lemon in there somewhere, but it's not actually made of lemon.
No.
And it's based on real events, but it doesn't actually portray real events.
No.
In fact, it distorts them. And I wish I thought that this didn't matter. But people do. I mean, I've caught myself at it sometimes. People do take fiction as being a key to the past if it describes historical events. And they are influenced by it. And it's ridiculous to pretend that they're not.
Yes.
Or to pretend that this kind of drama doesn't have political effect. I had a long row with the BBC about Call the Midwife and its portrayal of the abortion law reforms. Yes. And they would not accept that it was reasonable to say that a drama watched by millions of people, which dwelt on historical events, had no effect on people's thinking, or should be subject to any kind of rules about impartiality.
Yes, because if that were the case, why on earth would you have to write something which appears on the face of it to be a political statement as part of a drama? Speaking of dramas of real events, though, I see that you also mentioned this weekend the Blair Brown documentary, which I'm finding quite fascinating, actually. I've only seen the first two so far. I haven't seen your appearance in it yet, but...
it's quite early on. It's in, I think, the first one.
Oh, is it? Oh, maybe I missed it then.
It's so fast that you probably miss it.
Oh, maybe I missed it. But it's quite a good. It's quite a good. It's quite a good documentary series, I think.
Well, it's good in that it's interesting. I mean, I've watched, I think, a lot now, and I'm interested because partly it's wonderful to see how much older everybody's got since then.
Oh, they look so young, don't they? It's amazing.
Always amusing, but what it does is it basically goes on as if it was just a personal tussle between Blair and Brown.
Yeah.
The actual things that the Blair government did, the huge, colossal changes in our society, breaking up the United Kingdom, destroying the House of Lords as an effective revising chamber, altering the Constitution, bringing in equality, diversity as the official national religion, utterly surrendering to the Irish Republican Army in Northern Ireland under American pressure. All these things are in the background, while the principal drama is, does Blair like Brown?
Right.
How did they get on at dinner? Was he rude about him? And who was on whose side? Well, this is all very well as soap opera, but the task is still not done of explaining what New Labour actually did and what an enormous impact it made. And although, as I say, it's fascinating viewing, it doesn't actually explain at all what was going on. And you could watch the whole lot of it. At the end of it, you'd be no wiser about how the country was transformed.
And do you think that's
why it was transformed?
And do you think that's because they're trying to portray them as more than they were, as men of great sort of higher learning and men of great sort of ideas, as opposed to what they actually ended up leaving us with, which we still have the remnants of today?
No, I just think it's because a lot of the people involved don't understand this either. There is a very, very limited understanding. I did a tiny public meeting in Manchester last week on the fringes of the Tory Party conference, and I said, here is the problem for all of you people. If you weren't trained in Marxism and Leninism, and you were never a Trotskyist, then your chances of understanding what's going on are minimal. You simply have never read the instruction manual. You don't know what's going on. And it's extraordinary how ill-equipped most journalists are for understanding the real nature of politics and how easily they're taken in by the superficials. Obviously, a personal battle between a Chancellor and Prime Minister, especially when they're as different people as Gordon Brown and the Blair creature, is fascinating in itself as a drama. But it really does seem to me time for somebody to go through that government and say, what did they actually do? And how did they do it? Rather than this incessant personalising.
Yeah. Well, I remember talking to Alistair Campbell once when I was down at College Green, and I sort of accused him of setting up the court, the Supreme Court, while Blair was in charge, so that Boris Johnson now could be taken to that court and found to be in breach of a law that he didn't know existed. And I said, look at all the things that you did. And he said to me, I wish we'd done more.
Of course. Alistair is somebody, I don't know how you would do it, because I don't know where he'd ever come clean about it. Alistair is an extraordinarily intelligent and focused person, and was in many cases the true executive prime minister for a large part of that period, and a man of very strong left-wing convictions, summed up in the fact that he has never married the mother of his children on principle.
Yeah.
It's a principle I don't agree with, but you can't deny that it exists and that he's fulfilled it. And he is also absolutely furiously passionate about the issue.
As he also,
as is the mother of his children, Fiona Miller. And these are huge issues, which betoken a very, very deep, in my view, very deep, very left-wing attitude towards life and the universe and everything, which we know so little about.
Yeah.
And the whole New Labour project was driven by people who were far, far more left-wing than they appear to be.
Although his left-wing principles don't presumably extend to him knocking together two rather large houses in a very expensive part of North London.
Of that, I know nothing. But you have to understand that the two great statements made by leaders of the left in the past 20 years. One was Deng Xiaoping, who remarked that to get rich is glorious. And he's about as left-wing as you can get. I think Peter Mandelson echoed it by saying he was totally relaxed about people getting filthy rich. The left don't care about that anymore. It doesn't. It isn't the issue of the issue of personal wealth, indeed of capitalism, doesn't bother them. What they've gone back to worrying about power, and it's ruthless exercise for a radical aim. They've gone really back, as I say many times, to the French Revolution, not the Russian Revolution. And it doesn't have much to do with money. They're absolutely not against people having money anymore.
No, interesting stuff. Peter, we're out of time, sadly. Thank you very much indeed.